in my opinion, and in a lot of public opinion, this gentleman is the #1 defense attorney in the country, probably. Okay? You got a round of applause. I didn't even say your freaking name yet, bro. He's probably the #1 defense attorney in the country. He's had some of the toughest cases, and I'm going to allow him to tell you a story. But, you know, it's one thing to see somebody succeed and see where they are currently in life. It's another thing to understand what they went through and to know what they went through. You know that saying, you always see what's in front of you, but you don't know all the work that went into it? Hurrah? Hurrah? All right. So one of the things that I sat down, he came to my office, I asked him, hey, can we do a Facebook Live interview and prepare for the Real Talk conference? And stuff came out in that interview that just blew my mind. Like, I'm probably going to ruin your whole freaking speech, but like, I'm a 9th grade high school dropout. Insane. Insane, right? When you think of the country's #1 defense attorney and he's a high school dropout, you almost don't correlate those two things, okay? So I'm going to allow him for a moment to tell the story. If everybody could give a great round of applause for Mr. Jose Baez. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, David. I really appreciate it, and thanks for stealing my thunder there. You know, when David asked me to come and speak to you all, I started to think of what am I going to tell you guys? Especially, we have similar fields, but they're different in many ways. And I hear some people laughing, but we're all in sales, my friend. And we're all always trying to persuade someone to do something. And it's at various different times. And I thought of what I could tell you guys about my success and what has made me successful. And I thought the best way to do that would really be to tell you about my failures. I think you can have all day plenty of excellent speakers tell you about their success and what makes them successful and how that could apply to you in your profession. But I sometimes believe in taking the road less traveled. And I think you'll see that at the end of my talk. I think I can count back my biggest failure and my story all the way back to Little League. And I say that because my mother is probably the most influential person in my life. And she had this thing about sayings and expressions. She would always throw things out like, don't eat the yellow snow, don't spit in the wind, things like that. And her favorite saying, or actually I should say her second favorite saying, because her favorite saying was, cállate la boca. Her favorite saying was, no hay caminos cortos. And I'll never forget, back in Little League, I was playing, and she would always show up to all my games with her chancletas running around. And I remember one day I struck out. We lost the game. It was my fault. And I wanted to go to her for some consolation. And she just looked at me and said, no hay caminos cortos. I didn't know what the hell that meant. So I go back, and throughout my life, she kept saying that, and reinforcing that, and reinforcing that. And I'll never forget, as David mentioned, I was 9th grade, 15, I knew it all. I didn't want to go to school anymore. So I woke up one day and I told her, I'm not going to school anymore. I quit. To my surprise, she literally looked at me and said, okay, no problem. You can come to work with me tomorrow. I was so excited because not only was I now out of school, I already had a job lined up. Who knew you could be so lucky? Until 5 o'clock in the morning came around, and she was waking me up. Let's go. Let's go. Actually, it was 4. She worked at a nursery in Homestead, and she dug ditches for me every day and put plants in. My job was pretty easy, to just dig the ditches. Once that sun rose in Homestead and began to beam down on me, I don't think I made it to 11 o'clock before I quit. And I literally said to her, you win. I'm going back to school tomorrow. And she looked at me again and said, te dije, no hay caminos cortos. That idea lasted for a little while until I finally just went out and quit on my own and I moved out. It wasn't until later on, when I was 17 and I had nothing to do, I ended up getting my girlfriend pregnant and I joined the Navy. I wanted to man up and be a father for my child, and as a kid, that's the only way I knew how. So I joined the Navy, and the first thing I realized about the Navy is, I don't want to fucking be here anymore. So I got my GED, and I got the GI Bill, and I went to school, and I did everything right. I listened, and I did everything right. And it was crazy. I got into law school by a whim. I was a C student. I didn't decide to go to law school until much later. And I think the people at the admissions office just simply felt sorry for me. I had applied to 25 different schools, including Harvard, Yale. I figured, shit, a couple of things are gonna happen. Either they'll put my file on the wrong stack, somebody there will have a sense of humor, or all they can do is tell me no. Well, they all told me no, with the exception of a little school here in Miami, St. Thomas University. Yeah, all right, some Bobcats in the house. And it was a wonderful, amazing experience. And I started to work at the Public Defender's Office in Miami, and I quickly became their star. I was an intern there, and I paid my dues. Before I graduated from law school, I had 10 jury trials under my belt, won each and every one of them. I went on to, when you're a new grad, the Supreme Court lets you try cases until you get admitted to the bar for up to a year. Then I had a problem. The Florida bar found me unfit to practice law because of financial irresponsibility. It was the most devastating experience of my life. I had 34 jury trials. I was a winner. I won all the time. I set records in the office. I had all of my colleagues look up to me. All of my classmates were moving on with their jobs, growing up, moving up the corporate ladder, really becoming successful. And the Florida bar said, no, I can't practice law because I didn't show the respect for others with my finances. 8 years went by before I could ever practice law. I cannot tell you how difficult those 8 years were for me. It was, what does a lawyer without a license do? Well, I know one, although he's got a license. But I didn't even think of real estate, I sold websites, I worked for LexisNexis, I did whatever I could to stay around the law, but I never really gave up on my dream. Once I was in the courtroom, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the process, our system of justice. I fell in love with fighting for someone who has no one in the world to fight for them. I fell in love with the process of really uncovering what human tragedy and what human emotions and feelings are all about. And to this day, I truly love what I do. When I went to my mother and I showed her how after all of this, after turning my life around and getting my high school GED and going to college and graduating from law school, they won't let me in. And again, I went to her for that consolation. And you guessed it, she looked at me and said, no hay caminos cortos. She was making me accept responsibility for what I thought was an unjust process. Made me accountable, however difficult it was. And that was a tough pill to swallow for me. So I got a job working for LexisNexis, and I was in a major funk here in Miami. I grew up here. I'm a local boy, and I loved it here. But I felt I needed a change. I needed to go somewhere else, and shit, maybe something will happen to me. So there was an opening in Orlando, and I moved to Orlando. And I figured, okay, let me see if something happens to me here. Well, I'll tell you something did happen. I eventually got my license. I started to practice law. I stayed in Orlando because I thought, there aren't too many Hispanic lawyers here. I can be different. I can make my name, be a big fish in a small pond. And I started to do that. And I'll tell you that about 2.5 years into my little practice, as I was building my business, like many of you are today, I built what was a solid reputation in the Puerto Rican criminal community. And they started referring me business. And the next thing you know, this girl goes into lockup, who's an unknown, obscure person, and her name is Casey Anthony. And she asks 2 Puerto Rican girls in the lockup, "You guys know a good lawyer?" And they said, "Yeah, you got to call Jose Baez." And that's how it all started. And I look back now, as many of you all know how it all turned out. It turned out to be the trial of the century, and it gave me the opportunity to do my thing on a national stage. I can tell you it was a grueling process. I was not a local kid or local face or local name in Orlando, and it was quite brutal. I faced all kinds of odds in that case, and I nearly got arrested myself. There were tons of things said about me. I lost my home. It was the most difficult case I've ever had to endure. But there's one thing I knew, and the one thing that was ringing through my head as I was suffering each and every day, and that is the voice of my mother saying, "No hay caminos cortos." And I knew, as things got tough, that I could handle them just a little bit tougher. And when they threw something at me, I could handle something else. And so on and so on and so on. So finally, it got to the point where they realized they could knock me down, but I was going to get back up. And it was because of that little voice in my ear. You don't realize things during success. You don't realize that and failures, I should say, especially in failures. I didn't realize that if it weren't for the Florida bar denying me admission, and if it weren't for those 8 years telling me that I had to get off my ass and do something different, I wouldn't have moved to Orlando. I've got no connections there. There was absolutely nothing driving me there. And if it weren't for the worst thing that ever happened to me, the biggest business opportunity would have never occurred. I would have gotten my license here, been practicing here, and my road may have gone a different way. I don't know. But what I do know is my path to Orlando came through the darkest valley that I ever had to encounter in my career. It wasn't fair what happened to me. I didn't think it was justified, and many people who know the facts don't either. But that really doesn't matter. This is my story, and these are the things that happened to me, and I couldn't make excuses for them. But what they all did, without a doubt, is prepare me for the battles that I was going to face ahead. Had I not gone through that, I wouldn't have been prepared. I would have failed just like they all said I was going to. I would have quit a lot faster than they thought I would. But because of those failures, it really brought me to that point. And you don't really connect the dots in your life until you're later on down the road, and you can look back and say, that's how I got here. And as I said in the beginning, that's how I took the road less traveled. And it doesn't just end there. You will always hold on to these failures, and you will make them your strength, and you will go to them kind of like, you ever hear the expression going to the well? Well, you'll go to that well in your good times and your bad times. You should do it in your good times to keep you grounded, because I'll tell you something else. There's nothing more difficult when you're on top is staying there, because everybody wants a piece of you then. Everyone's expecting you to fail. I told David, if there are 3 things that I believe makes a person successful, and that is, 1, the desire not to suck. And you have to have that, the desire to be successful. But everybody has that dream. The other thing is the willingness to work hard for it. And I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard already today. You've got to work hard. No hay caminos cortos. But the third thing I think that gets overlooked the most is you really have to have the patience to see it through. Because if you don't have patience with your own dream, who the fuck else is going to? No one. No one cares about your dreams but you. Yeah, people who love you care about them and want you to succeed, but who owns them, who loves them, who believes in them most? You. So why not have the patience for it? Why not know that when times are rough, when the world's against you, now's not the time to quit. Now's not the time to give up. It's your dream. And I hope you all succeed in it. And I hope you all realize it. And believe you me, if I can have walked that path and gotten where I am today, I know each and every one of you can. Thank you.